Support for BackPage has been provided by Neil Kelly Design, Build and Remodeling, offering home remodeling, rebuilding, and new home design with showrooms in Portland, Eugene, and Bend. And by Kohopono Multimedia Publishing, on the web at kohopono.com.
Hello and welcome to BackPage. I'm Jody C. and today we're talking with Jim Wygant about his books. One is called The Spy's Demise and the other one is called Jessica's Tune. So we're glad to have him with us, and Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
You've had a fascinating life so far.
So far.
Yeah? So tell me how this all came about for you.
Well, I have always wanted to write, and I have an English degree from Portland State, which led me originally into a career in journalism, but that didn't suit me very well. So I left that, and actually after I left I was at the Oregonian for a couple of years as a reporter. And after I left that, I took a trip to Mexico. I got in my Volkswagen Bug and drove to Acapulco. And only
spring break.
Yeah,
right?
well, a little longer than that. Yeah, only one breakdown along the way. And then I got back. I had no job, and a friend said, "Well, they need an investigator in a district attorney's office." So I thought, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I could, you know." And they also wanted somebody that could write press releases, so it was a kind of a combination deal. So that got me involved more immediately in the law. As a reporter, I had been a police reporter for about a year and just loved it. So I worked for government agencies, the DA's office and the Attorney General's office for a total of 10 years. And I don't take well to management, and was really looking for something that I could do on my own. So I transitioned into being a polygraph examiner, self-employed for over 30 years now.
See, this is the stuff that we like to talk about on this show, the story behind the story.
Yeah.
You know? Like, he doesn't take well to management. So,
so
anyway, so you wound up
So I've always had these two interests, one writing and the other dealing with people in dire straits, which is what you see when you're involved with legal things. These books are, I guess, the realization of some ideas I had about the significance of betrayal and loyalty and secrecy, and how those seem like such critical moments in people's lives. I have also been a big fan of spies. And I've read extensively about Robert Hanssen and Aldrich Ames and John Walker, who were the three biggest spies in the history of the United States.
What about their lives fascinates you? Like, why did they do it, or how they get away with it?
Yes.
Do you remember that show, I Led Three Lives, when we were kids? Herbert Philbrick was the guy's name.
Right.
And so he was a spy.
He was a counter spy, worked for the FBI, and that was in the communist era when we were all afraid that there was a communist behind every telephone pole. And Aldrich Ames and Hanssen and Walker are interesting people because they had careers with the United States government, and for different reasons in each case, they decided to throw those over and sell information to the Soviet Union. And it is kind of curious, you know, what brings people to do that, because in effect you are betraying everything that you held sacred up to a certain point. So The Spy's Demise is about a Russian agent who is assigned to the United States, and while he's in the United States legally, somebody who's with the CIA presents himself as a a counter spy. You know, I'll supply you with secrets. That's derived loosely from the circumstances of Aldrich Ames. So our hero in The Spy's Demise has this guy who introduces himself. He wasn't recruited, but he's a CIA agent. He says, I'll give you information, you give me money. And some time passes, and the hero in the book, hero is really not the right word to use here, I think, but protagonist would be a better word.
But he is. Well, I mean, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he is basically a nice guy.
Yeah.
Even though he's a Russian agent. So he's working for the KGB. He goes back to Moscow and becomes disillusioned both with the failing government. This is in the era, the early 90s, when the Soviet Union was in a state of collapse.
Right.
And in fact, the day that he leaves Moscow, he walks away from his job, from a marriage that wasn't working out for him. And that happened to be the day that Yeltsin got up and stood on the tank, which many people can remember seeing portrayed on television news. And he hooks up with a woman, just meets her at the airport, and has the idea that he could use her as a means of hiding his whereabouts. In other words, if he's staying with her, he doesn't have to register at a hotel and things that would provide some kind of a trail for anybody trying to find him.
Well, see, that was one of the things I wondered, like, if you were a KGB agent, how in the world would you just walk away from it? I mean, you know? Yeah,
well, basically what you find, and I have to say, over the years I've known many CIA agents. I still have some who are good friends, and it's just another government agency. It's another bureaucracy. You know, because it's secret, we think that it works on some different level, but it really doesn't. It's all just government bureaucracy. So it's not that hard to walk away, especially at that particular time, because at the time that he left, the KGB was involved in trying to accomplish a coup, and which is why Yeltsin ended up standing on top of a tank. And the KGB actually ended then. The government decided this place is too risky. It ended in a technical sense. They took the name away. The agency is still there, but they're now called the FSB. They have a different name now.
Now it's called SH.
Yeah, now it's SH. So you know how governments work. You know, if an agency gives you trouble, you take their name away and you just give them another name. So,
you know, there was a while back, there was some billionaire guy who, this was after the Soviet Union collapsed, and it seemed like, you know, they didn't have any money at all. So this billionaire guy pays $20 million to go ride on the spaceship
thing,
Mir, and I thought, you know, they've got it strapped together with duct tape. They don't have enough gas to get home.
Yeah.
But apparently it did.
It worked, I think.
Let me do this. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Jim Wygant today about two of his books, The Spy's Demise and Jessica's Tune, which is kind of fascinating, as is Jim. So keep going.
Well, in any case, I don't want to give away the ending of the story here, but what happens is that the protagonist in The Spy's Demise goes to New York. He ends up in New York. He goes through Madrid and then to New York. And at that time, there were a lot of Russian immigrants in Brighton Beach, which is the Coney Island area of New York. It's near Brooklyn.
So they have their own kind of mafia kind of setup.
They did, yes. And what was happening was that in the chaos in the Soviet Union's collapse, a lot of people who'd been involved in the Soviet Union figured the whole place is going to come down. It didn't, but they figured we better get out of here. So some of the worst of them came to Brighton Beach and started mobs there. And for a period of time in the 90s, they were quite vicious. The mobs, there was a lot of competition between them for various kinds of fraud that they committed to support themselves. And there were a lot of murders, cars being blown up, guys being shot on the streets. And finally the FBI stepped in a real heavy way and sort of shut all that down. But the protagonist in The Spy's Demise ends up in Brighton Beach because he's arrived in the United States and he no longer has a government payroll to support him, so he needs to figure out a way to take care of himself. And the obvious thing was to get hooked up with some of these mobs, because those are the same Russians that he knew when he was in the Soviet Union.
Only was he chasing them then, and now he's
No, he wasn't
friends with
chasing them, but you know, there was a lot of corruption in the Soviet Union even before it collapsed, and so he was familiar with some of these people and some of their ways. So it's an unfortunate turn for him, because he gets involved in some things that he really doesn't like, some violence. And there's some unfortunate circumstances involving this woman that he escaped from the Soviet Union with whom he becomes involved romantically. It ends well, I will say that much, because he survives to appear in the subsequent book, Jessica's Tune. So the spy's demise here is not so much a reference to the fact that he dies. The demise doesn't mean he dies. I can give that much away.
Okay.
But it does mean it's the end of his career, and he becomes something else.
So tell me about your career as a polygraph examiner. What do you call? What'd you call yourself?
That's it. You have it right.
Okay.
Yes. My work has been almost exclusively for the defense side. I know all the law enforcement examiners, and we all get along fine, but most police agencies have their own examiners. I've done some work for police agencies when they haven't had somebody else available, but mostly they like to use their own people. The defense hires their own, and that's mostly what I've done. And it's been a very interesting career. I'm mostly retired from that now.
Is that accurate? I mean, really, really accurate?
Well, that's the standard question that everybody asks, is how accurate it is. If you're doing the right thing, if you're following the correct procedures that have been researched and validated, the accuracy is in the range of anywhere from 85 to 95%. So it's a lot more accurate than eyewitness identification. It's a lot more accurate than just about anything else. But it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And I don't think any polygraph examiner would ever claim that it is.
So as a polygraph examiner, when you're in questioning someone, if someone sits down in the chair, can you look at them and think, this guy's a weasel? Just by body language or...
Sure, sometimes you can, yeah.
You know?
But a lot of people don't give themselves away. I'm probably no better at judging whether somebody is telling the truth or not just using native skills than anybody else would be. Research has been done, shows that it's an interesting project where they took some polygraph examiners, some judges, some lawyers, and some police officers and showed them some videos and said, is this person lying or is this person telling the truth? Well, they all came out about the same, a little better than random, a little better than chance determination. So, you know, you could make some good guesses, but a lot of the time you were wrong. It was interesting that the people who did the best in that particular research project were Secret Service agents. And if you think about it for a second, these are the guys with the dark glasses who are always scanning. That's what they do. They look at people. When I'm doing a polygraph test, I'm thinking about what I'm going to ask the guy in the test. I've got to attend to the equipment. So there are some distractions for me. But if your job is just to focus on faces and try to decide whether they represent a threat or not, it provides you with some skills in lie detection that are measurably better than just average.
You know, you have to wonder about the guys in the Secret Service. Can they ever take their kids to a parade and actually watch the parade and have a good time? I mean, are their eyeballs going like this all the time to spot danger?
I don't know.
You know?
You have to get a Secret Service agent on the program.
So after you stopped doing that, is that when you began writing? Because you've done a number of things after that.
Yeah, I've been writing right along. I've published a newsletter for polygraph examiners for 14 years now, bi-monthly newsletter.
What do you call it?
Polygraph News and Views. It's just for examiners.
You can come up with a better name than that.
Well,
you know,
that's what I started with, and I never changed it. So
Total Lies by Jim Wygant.
No, it's mostly what it says. It's news of things going on in the polygraph world, and also some opinion things, but mostly it's just news. I was trying to fill a void. There is a national organization that puts out a newsletter, but like the newsletters of many national organizations, it's mostly a lot of self-congratulatory stuff. So, so anyway, I've done that, and I've written some short stories over the years. And way back in the dark ages, I actually wrote some poetry as well. But the novels did come after I retired, yeah. And Spy's Demise actually began work on that probably, I would say, 2 or 3 years ago. And Jessica's Tune was followed almost immediately as soon as the first one was finished.
Did you self-publish these, or did you find a publisher?
Yes, no, they are self-published in the sense that I created a publisher, but basically I'm the publisher.
Yeah. Well, you know, there used to be kind of a stigma attached to that, like it was, you know, doing your own dentistry or something, but it's really not that way. You can really put out some good quality stuff.
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities now, and actually the printer that I use, I do all the formatting and everything, so it's basically I just provide them with PDF files to print from, and they have to be connected to Ingram, so Ingram is the big book distributor. So the books are distributed everywhere. They're on Amazon. You can get them from bookstores. They're available any place. You might have to order them from a bookstore because bookstores don't stock a lot of fiction now. There's a big problem with the fiction market, and you're probably well aware of that it's really declined in the last decade or so. Most of the stuff that's published now is nonfiction. Memoirs are big.
Memoirs are big,
and self-improvement, and young adult books are very popular as well. I volunteer for at the Multnomah County Library in their used bookstore, the Tidal Wave, and I've done that for 13, 14 years. And in that time, and all the books that are in that bookstore are books that have been taken out of circulation from the library, so they're all old library books. So it's a sort of a measure of what's going on with the library, and in that time, the volume of fiction has been reduced by about half.
Really?
From when I started.
Wow, that's considerable.
Yeah, and I see nonfiction titles come through regularly, and I just wonder, how did these ever get published to begin with? Some of them just seem so silly.
Well,
but
you never know.
Yeah, somebody wants it.
Well, you know, I wrote a novel a while back, and just recently I finished a memoir called Dead in a Ditch, growing up in Texas and other near-death experiences. And somebody said, well, why would anybody want to read about your life? And I went, well, yeah, it's funny.
Well, in fact, I'm working on a memoir now about polygraph, although it features a lot of tales about murders and thefts, and so it's got lots of stuff that people like to read about.
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Patricia Cornwell's stories probably wouldn't be so popular if there weren't some blood and guts involved, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that was...
It's an unfortunate reality. I mean, if you look at the TV news, it's full of crime stories. Yeah. And most of them, of course, are insignificant in our daily lives, and in fact, most of them, by tomorrow, we will have forgotten about.
That's true. But, you know, the thing that's interesting to me about memoirs is that sometimes I'll read something and it's otherwise a really good book, but sometimes there's just a little too much information. You know? Yeah. It's like, you don't have to tell them everything you know. Right. I don't think. And because sometimes I go, ooh, I kind of wish I didn't know that about them, you know? But anyway. Yeah,
I think after a while when you write much, you get a sense of the sorts of things that work and the sorts of things that don't work. This memoir that I'm working on, I actually started 10 years ago and set it aside for a long period of time, and then I went back, and I was actually going to just forget about it. I thought, well, this is not going anywhere. And I started looking at it, and I thought, you know, this actually looks pretty good, but I can see some places where it really needs a strong hand, some heavy revision. So that's what I've been doing for the last few months, is trying to revise that. But you do need to have a detached view. It's hard to edit your own stuff. You know, you really fall in love with your own words. But I've become, over the years, a very ruthless editor. And if something doesn't sound right to me, if I have to, as I'm reading, if I hesitate on a phrase, if I have trouble figuring out what exactly did I mean there, that hesitation tells me, fix it.
Well, you know, when I reread my own work, there's a feeling that you get if you see within 3 to 5 sentences the same word. Like in one sentence, if you say car, don't say car in the next sentence, say auto, you know, or junker, or, you know, urban assault vehicle, whatever. Just don't say the same thing. And that's what I noticed. And it's not even that I noticed the word, it's just kind of a feeling that comes up. And I go, something's not right, something's not right. And I reread it, and that's what it always is.
Yeah.
So you're the final editor on your
Yes,
on
I
your
am.
work?
Yes, I do the first draft and all the subsequent drafts. And so, yeah, I'm kind of a one-man shop.
How do you know when you've gotten it right? How do you know when it needs no more?
That's a good question, and you never know. I mean, you get to a point where you just have to say, I could keep revising this forever, but the revisions become more minuscule and more petty all the time, and for the average reader, they're not going to make a lot of difference. So you reach a point where you have to say, well, okay, I'm going to be satisfied with this. You know, this is as good as it's going to get. There's going to be little things that could be tweaked, but it's not worth going back repeatedly and doing that. So revision's important, but you do reach a point, and it's arbitrary. I mean, you reach a point where you think, well, you know, I'm not seeing any major things that need to be changed here. Let's go with this.
Well, you know, I read about your book in the Selwood Bee.
Yes.
In that newspaper. How did that story come about for you? Did they track you down?
I think I tracked them down.
Attaboy.
Yeah, well.
Self-promotion.
Yeah, exactly, yes. Yeah, I sent them an email and said, hey, I got this book, and they sent somebody around to interview me. They were very kind about that. Nice big article with a picture.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
And see, for me, this job makes me very predatory. You know, I'm always,
yes.
You know, I hear something at the post office and I'll go, did you write a book? You know, and a lot of times they'll say, yeah. So, you know, that's how I find out about all this stuff.
Well, in the days of word processors, everybody thinks they have a book in them, and many people do.
Yes.
But some of those who think they do don't. So,
yeah, well,
unfortunately. So.
Well, the good part is that, at least on this show, we focus on the story behind the story. What are all the gears that had to grind in a particular way to get you to this place, you know? And when you look at your own background, your own life, it's kind of fascinating, really.
Well, I'm glad you observed that. I feel that it's been fascinating. I'm pleased with where I am today. I've done things that interested me and walked away from some things that, in retrospect, I'm glad I walked away from. So. Yeah, it's worked out well for me. These two books, by the way, have nothing in them about polygraph. The word doesn't appear. There are no lie detector tests.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
So how did you learn so much about the KGB and all of that?
Well, some of it, as I said, is from reading about Aldrich Ames and Walker and Hansen. And I've done a lot of reading of them. But a lot of it is just knowing how agencies work. You know, I worked in a DA's office for 5 years and in the Attorney General's office for 5 as an investigator in both of those offices. And you get a sense of how things work and how people operate. And as I said, I have some friends who are CIA agents or former CIA agents, and they're mostly no different than anybody else.
But what can they share with you? I have a friend whose dad worked for the CIA.
They don't usually talk cases, no.
Yeah, because she said that her dad, I mean, he just couldn't say, so they learned not to ask.
Yeah.
How was your day? You know, they just or what are you working on, Dad? They just,
Yeah.
you couldn't tell them, so.
That's why you're still there. After you leave, some of them loosen up a little bit.
Yes. If you've just tuned in, I'm Jody C., and this program is Backpage, and we're talking with Jim Wygant about his books, The Spy's Demise and Jessica's Tune. So I'm going to ask you what everybody asks a writer as soon as they finish the last book. Everybody goes, so what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a memoir, and hopefully I will have it done in the next few months. It's mostly written. I had a friend of mine read it who's a well-known in the polygraph community. He's a guy with a PhD, and he said he thought it was great, but he had some suggestions, and they happened to be the same things that I had already been thinking, you know, maybe I ought to do something with that, but I was too lazy to actually do it. And his suggestions sort of fired me up. So I'm doing some revisions that are involve moving some chapters around, writing one entirely new chapter, and editing down, reducing the size of one chapter that went on at too much length about something that wasn't all that interesting. So. But overall, I think it's going to be a very interesting book, and it probably have more appeal than these two novels. Certainly will have appeal within the community of polygraph examiners, but I think beyond that as well. The title of it, the tentative title, is Confessions of a Lie Detector. And then there's a subtitle, Years of Theft and Murder.
Ooh.
So I'm trying to grab them right on the cover.
Yeah, that's good. Because they'll think, I mean, it's not your own thievery and not your own murderous nature, but still, theft and murder will draw
people in.
But
there have been a lot of murder cases over the years. I've done over 6,000 polygraph tests in my career, and probably about 150 of those have been on murder issues. Had one serial killer, some people accused of killing babies, you know, infant abuse, some pretty horrendous things. And then there have been some other theft cases that were interesting just because of the circumstances.
In your career, were there ever people that passed a polygraph test that actually turned out to be guilty in the long run?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's, you know, you're less apt to hear about that, because if they pass the test, often suspicion is lifted and nothing further happens. There have been some cases where people have flunked polygraph tests, and it was later on established that they had been telling the truth and that somebody else did the crime. So
the area for what am I trying to say? There could be a blunder in terms of someone winding up being falsely accused, or?
I think that the incidence of false positives and false negatives, that's mistakes in either direction, is probably about equal. Research seems to indicate that. The problem with the false negatives, which are cases where you say somebody's telling the truth and they're really not, is that often the investigation shuts down, not because of the polygraph results, but because it's just one more piece of discouragement.
Yeah.
Often in these cases, if they had evidence, they certainly would proceed. They're not going to make a decision based entirely on polygraph results. So decisions of that kind usually encompass the fact that there either isn't anything else to prove somebody's guilty, or that there is enough to proceed to prosecution.
Well, I tell you, it's a fascinating subject, Jim. And people can get these books, your books, The Spy's Demise and Jessica's Tune, on Amazon?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Powell's, any place that sells books. But some smaller bookstores may not have them in stock. They might have to order them for you, but they can order them.
Okay. Anyway, they're making motions that we're going to have to ride on out of here. So
oh, my.
Thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah. And be sure to join us again next time as we take another peek at the back page. I'm Jody C. Remember, we're all in this together. More the same than different. Do your best. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Support for BackPage has been provided by Neil Kelly Design, Build and Remodeling, offering home remodeling, rebuilding, and new home design with showrooms in Portland, Eugene, and Bend. And by Kohopono Multimedia Publishing, on the web at kohopono.com.